So this session is called Embracing Single-Parent Families in the Church. And I think this is really the heart of what we're going to be talking about. And again, yesterday we said, well, usually when you talk about single-parent family ministry, you're starting with an ideal of a program like a Bible study or an activity or doing something with people, meeting a need. But we're not starting there. We're starting with building relationships. We're starting with building community because that's where I believe the real transformation takes place. And yes, meeting practical needs is important. And yes, Bible studies and divorce care groups and grief groups, all those things are important and they're needed. But if there's not a foundation of mutually transformational relationships that serve as a vehicle for the transforming, renewing, redeeming power of Christ, then people can be helped, but their lives may not be transformed. And we're not building a foundation for the next generation. And we're thinking generationally. We're thinking not just about helping this individual at this point in time, but we're thinking of building up the family unit, because as we've talked about, it's the family that God has ordained to transmit values, to build identity, to teach the good news of Jesus Christ and pass it on and pass it on and pass it on. So we're talking about breaking cycles. We're talking about healing wounds. We're talking about releasing gifts, and all those are supposed to happen within the context of the body of Christ. So our goal for this session is to equip churches to embrace single-parent families so that they become a valued, integral part of the life of the church. So, as we asked the question this morning, imagine a single parent entering your church. What does your church need to do now to embrace that person and their children as they are, show that they are valued by the church, help them to restore their lives, and engage their gifts? And we're going to be starting on page 21 in your booklet. And I'm going to ask Andy to pass out some quotes. We're going to be hearing voices from single parents as part of this. So if you get the quote from Andy, just hang on to it, and I'll tell you the right time to read it. So here's the starting point. Here is the first step, that when someone walks in the church, they're warmly welcomed. Sounds pretty basic, right? So warmly embrace any single-parent family who wants a church home. Any congregation can focus on nurturing a church culture that embraces single-parent families and builds meaningful relationships. So not every church can do everything, but every church can do this. There is not a church that can say, well, we don't have the resources, we don't have the volunteers, we don't have the funding, we don't have the whatever. We don't have the seats. There is no excuse there at any church anywhere that calls itself part of the body of Christ not to embrace a family that comes seeking fellowship, seeking restoration, seeking the Word of God. Amen? Amen. All right. So here's our roadmap for this session. We're going to talk about 4 steps here, or three steps and a special note. The first step, welcome single-parent families into the church. Second step, connect families with the life of the church. Third step, engage families as kingdom assets through the church. And then we're also going to focus on children of single parents. So, we're talking about families, but we also want to take a little time to just talk about kids because some of their needs and issues and culture is different. Okay, so first step, welcome single-parent families into the church. Let's listen to some of these quotes of single parents talking about their experiences in the church. And if you have a quote numbered 7 through 12, just go ahead and read them sequentially. Don't wait for me. Just go ahead and speak up.
I have never felt more alone in my life than sitting alone in church.
2 weeks ago was the first time I was in a church for 8 years. I guess being a single parent made me want to go to church because I wanted something positive in me and my children. That resonates with me because it was 8 years that I stayed out of church. I didn't feel comfortable.
Did you go back for your kids also?
Condemnation. I feel like I have a scarlet letter on my chest. I really feel like I am not included.
The worst is when nobody talks to you and they just stare at you or look and turn away.
I'm gonna get in trouble with my wife and I sitting together. I know I'm gonna have to make a comment. We may have to have single family time.
You're in a room full of church people. You're okay.
No, I'm not. I sit in the same pew, giving one row every Sunday. I don't know the people around you. It's not whether or not you're a single mother, it's perception. Because we don't speak to married couples, we don't speak to anybody, the bigger the church. And I'm going to have to cover up what church I belong to. But the problem that we have to understand in some ways is that there is not an openness and a warmness to anybody. You visit with who you know, you speak to who you know, and that's it. And if it's a big church, you can say, oh, are you new here? No, I've been a member for 10 years. And so I think it's more than just that problem. So I just wanted to tell you.
Well, I'm glad you said that because this does point out there is a larger problem of nurturing a welcoming church culture in our churches, period. And one of the selling points, actually, for single-parent family ministry is that it makes the church better at welcoming anyone who walks through the doors. So, and makes the church better at engaging with one another who are already in the congregation. So there are lots of lonely people sitting in our pews. There are lots of disengaged families. And it's not just about, are you a single parent, are you not? So I'm really glad you said that because we are kind of in a silo in this training. We're talking about single parent families. But really, we could be talking about anyone. That a lot of this stuff is about anyone who is struggling as a family, as a household, or even a single person without kids who may be lonely and feel unattached. And so we're going to say single-parent families as kind of a proxy for anyone who comes through the church's doors who is seeking a church home. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I've lost track of where we are. Are we 10? Okay, so quote 11.
At my church, every time I came, one woman always made a point to come to me and talk to me. That meant a lot to me.
That'd be nice.
To add to what he said, one of the things I learned years ago, being alone, was I don't sit in the same place every Sunday. I move around. And somebody said, well, I didn't see you in church. I said, I don't sit in the same place every Sunday.
Somebody said coming in this morning, let's look at a scientific experiment to see if everybody's sitting in the same places that they were last night. So, pretty much, yep. I know I have my pew. But I'll tell you why I sit in my pew. I sit in the back. I sit intentionally in the very back row because I've got my kids who are not always the best behaved, and I have I bring kids from another mom that we bring with us, and we are our own little world back here, so we're not distracting the worship. So that's my pew. And if you sit near me and you're distracted, you asked for it. Okay, so quote 12. Yeah, go ahead.
Many single parents already feel abandoned. They need to know they are not abandoned by the church and to feel accepted by the church.
Thank you. Our vision for this step is that when single-parent families, or again, any family, enters the church, they are warmly and sincerely welcomed, treated with dignity, and accepted without judgment. The congregation communicates to parents and children that their presence is valued. So it's not just a passive Y'all come, sure, it's fine with us that you're here, but there's something proactive and intentional about this quality of being a welcoming church. So, two-part strategy to developing this welcoming culture. The first is eliminating red flags, things that tell a single parent, you're not one of us. You're not really welcome here. And then the second is to provide an intentional welcome. All right, Family Feud time. In your little groups, identify 4 red flags that single parents may encounter, something that might be said or done, or something they might see, or something in the setting that might suggest to a single parent family, back off, you're not really welcome here, or might cause them to leave feeling like, I'm not sure if this is really the right place for me. So get in your little groups, take 4 minutes to come up with 4 red flags. All right, let's come back together. All right, so on page 23, I provided some suggestions of red flags, so let's look at that. As a single parent, I might not be welcome here if no one greets you, or if they greet you but they're really cold and their eyes are unfriendly. If people just look at you, you get looks that you interpret to be judgmental or suspicious. If you're an island on the pew, so you're sitting there with your kids and, they say, okay, let's stand up and greet the person on your left and your right, and there's nobody sitting on your left or your right. If the parent is asked, oh, so where's your husband this morning? Or they ask the child, so where's your dad? I'd love to meet your dad. If, and this did happen to me, if the visitor form, or if when you go to check in your child at the nursery, it asks for your marital status. So right from the beginning, if I were a single parent, and here it is, I'm checking in my child, and they ask me, am I a single parent? I'm either going to lie, or I'm going to leave it blank, or I'm going to feel my child is starting out with a stigma from the first time that anybody ever meets her. Yeah.
Security. If you have you need some of this information, and you need to tell them why you need it, because what happens if the husband who is estranged or can kidnap the child? And we pass out a number, or actually something so that you can redeem your child at the end of the service.
The way
they won't let
Right.
them go with anybody else, because if they do, they run that chance. And so
Just ask
that's
the
a very
question.
delicate.
Who
That's
is
a very
allowed?
delicate.
The language that's appropriate to use is guardian. Who is the guardian for this child? And to ask, are there any other individuals who may, and then you can have a blank to say relationship to the child. And you do need that information in some settings. I'm not sure, if I were to show up at church, say with my boyfriend, I'm not sure why it's the church nursery worker's business if I'm married to that boyfriend or not. Now, if I'm in a discipling relationship with somebody, sure, they're going to need that information. But, just checking a child into a nursery for a first-time visitor, that's going to send a message to them. So there are appropriate and non-discriminatory language that you can use that gets at that same important information. But I'm really glad you brought that up, because sometimes you can be married and be in that situation. So just saying, are you married, doesn't get at whether your husband, your currently married husband, he may be an abusive husband. You may be separated from your spouse because your spouse was abusing your child or abusing you. And so just saying, are you married, and then you're assuming that this husband of yours is an acceptable person to pick up the child, that also is not the case.
Well, the reality is the person who made that form likely is married in a good relationship. Seriously, and so it's important to get even your forms to get them vetted through people who are going to be more responsive to that language.
Excellent point. Children get stern looks if they make noise. Now, my husband is a pastor, so during the services, I'm a single parent. And it's hard to be trying to pay attention to the service, and then also shepherding kids that may or may not want to be there, may or may not have a history. Now, my kids have been in church from the day that they were born almost, but sometimes they still don't want to go to church, and sometimes they still don't behave appropriately. And if you're a single parent, remember we talked about yesterday that of any group of people, married, single, whatever, never married mothers are the most likely to say, my child is the most important thing in the world to me. If they're in church and a church member gives their child a rude word or a stern look, they're going to be mama hen. And they're going to instantly be protective of their child. And so if you want to, there's nothing that's going to drive away a single parent faster than not welcoming their child. So can we deal, again, it's about how you do it. Can you deal with disruptive children in the service? Sure. But you do it in a loving, productive way. For example, in one of the churches that I attended, there was a pew mama. And she always came, it was just her gift. She always came prepared with little snacks and coloring books. And anytime there was a child, married or not, in the service who was disruptive, she just gently asked the mom, I would love to have your child come and sit with me and hang out with me for a little bit. And in our situation, everybody knew that she was a safe person. And, again, there's a lot of issues there. We're going to go into that particular question at a separate workshop of how you do this. So again, we're just kind of providing the overview. But the main point is that if you want to deal with a disruptive child, a stern look and a harsh word is not the way to do it, but to come alongside a mother and help to engage the child and support her and affirm her for her parenting and bringing a child to church, that's the most important thing. The church's brochure, website, etc., depict only pictures of happy two-parent families. So I have clicked on a lot of church websites, and almost always the thing you see is the mother and the father of whatever ethnicity is that church's ethnicity with a kid, and they're all just hugging and looking so happy, which is great, right? I mean, this is our ideal of what a family would be like, and who wouldn't want to be that person that's living up there. But if your family life does not look like that, then the message to you is you're not really one of us.
That's why reality shows have become so popular.
Because we look at them and say, that's me. There is no mention of singles in any of the church's ministry activities. So it says, lists on the website, here are the groups that we have. We've got for marrieds, we've got for seniors, we've got for kids, but it doesn't. So if you're going to break down the church into groups, and you don't have to have a singles group or a marrieds group, but if you do, and if you list it publicly, and you don't specifically say that there's a place for singles or for single parents, they're going to feel excluded. And all the sermon illustrations refer to husbands and wives. So you're telling a joke, oh, well, this is a funny thing my wife did, or this is a funny thing my husband did. And again, it's about seeing yourself reflected in the church culture.
This is one that most people in this room may think doesn't happen, but I've seen it happen. And that is asking a single parent to come on stage to receive material assistance publicly. The thought from the church is, we want to show that we're loving and that we're helpful and all that kind of stuff. And, the response of that family was they never attended that church again.
Right. Right. Or a big one also is Mother's Day, Father's Day, how you handle that. And so one of the stories I read was about Mother's Day celebration. They invited all the mothers to come and stand up on church. And then they said, okay, now husbands, come and pin a flower on your wife. And so, here's this person who was recently attending this church, and she's just standing up there looking feeling stupid because everybody else is getting a rose. And finally, a woman realized what was going on and came up and pinned it on her. But by then, it was over.
My son's wife died 4 years ago, and one of the things that happened was the teacher on Mother's Day said, write your mother a love note.
And these are all examples, and I mean, we could probably talk a long time about bad stuff that happens at church, and that's not the goal. But, although it is kind of fun. But I think Daniel raised the important point is that a lot of this stuff probably is done by people who are married, and it's very well-intentioned. No one sets out, I'm going to insult a single parent and drive their child away from church forever when they head to church. But it's because if you're not in relationship with a single parent, if you're not inviting single parents into the dialogue and into the planning, then these things might happen. And I think it's very important to recognize that we are going to make mistakes. We are going to hurt people. And our discussion about language earlier, we talked about the widow language. And for one person, it was affirming. But for another person, it may be insulting. And so part of it is that in a community, people do stuff to hurt each other. Are we willing to go the extra mile to reconcile, to ask people to find out what's going on? And again, we get more into this later, but if a single-parent family just stops going to church to maybe find out what happened, is it something that we did? Is there any way that we can restore a relationship with you? So the goal is not to never offend anybody, because that won't happen. But the goal is to be in loving relationships and to do what we can when we can to not put up these red flags, and if we do, to make it right. Okay, well, y'all get a dum-dum for this. Everybody up, because this is a dum-dum episode, exercise, right? We're figuring out all the dum-dums, so on your way out. Actually, Nikki, I was reminded that we're not supposed to have food in here, so on your way out, you can pick up a lollipop as your reward. All right, well, the main question is, like we talked about, how does a church eliminate these red flags? And here are some tools for doing that. Number one, conduct a welcome audit. And this is in the tools that we are providing for you. And later in the day, we are going to have a ministry assessment working group where you will get together with members of your church and you will work through this welcoming audit to see how welcoming your church is right now. So that's going to happen after lunch. Get input from single parents, as we talked about, and again, we have an instrument for doing that. That's part of your homework, is to organize to host a single parent gathering for the purpose of gathering input from single parents about, not necessarily your church, but on how best to welcome and affirm single parents. And then change red flags to green lights. So taking things that may come across as unwelcoming, like the married or single check boxes, and changing that language, changing that image on the brochure, adding some different sermon illustrations. So these are the tools that we are providing for you. So the second step in this strategy is provide intentional welcome. So the welcome mat is not enough. And that's true not just of single-parent families. That's true for anyone. You put out the welcome mat at the church and you say, y'all come. We got a nice sign out front. We have a great brochure. Well, that's just not enough. So to be intentional about welcoming families, one of the things that we're suggesting is to develop a welcome partner ministry. And that is where you train church members to have on their radar people who are coming into the church who look like they may need, who are not connected. Now, some people come because they're invited by another family in the church, or they've got friends in the church, or they come in with some natural connections. But to have this welcoming partner ministry, to have on your radar, you're attentive to people who come in and are not connected, and to welcome them and to connect them in the congregation. Now, again, this is not just for single parents. Single parents is the kind of the catalyst for doing this, but your welcome partners can welcome anyone. And in April, we will provide a training for your welcome partners. So your homework is to go back to your churches to introduce this idea of a welcome ministry and to find people who may want to participate in it. And they don't have to be people whose specific passion is single parent families, but people who are just naturally hospitable, naturally welcoming, who don't have little kids that they have to be paying attention to themselves during the service, but maybe have had kids in the past, so they know what that's like to try to be a parent during church, and to bring them to our welcome partner training in April, and then we can equip them to be the welcoming hands to people coming into your church. So again, and this is on page 23. We're at Penny Work if you're tracking in the workbook. But then also beyond training and launching the specific Welcome Partner Ministry. Oh, and just one more thing about this Welcome Partner Ministry is that it's not just for visitors. Your Welcome Partners also are tasked with going out after single parents who have gone out the back door. So we talked about needing to promote reconciliation and restore relationships. So if there are single parents who have left the church recently or attended for a while and then stopped coming, or just kind of are really on the fringe and only attending once in a while, and if your church has the ability to track these things, that you have people who are designated and trained to go after them. And that sends a signal, wow, you are important to us. We miss you. You came and then you left, and we miss you. You're so important to me that I tracked you down to find out why you're not why are you not coming to church, but what can we do to make our church a welcoming place for you and your kids? And then also that you are equipped with this Welcome Partner Ministry, you are equipped to minister to people who become single parents. So when there's a death of a spouse, when there's a divorce or a separation, that you have a group of people who are ready to jump in and stand with these newly reformed families. And then also finally what that Welcome Partner Ministry does is it helps connect people with relevant church ministries and activities. So if you have a single parent who has been coming for a while but isn't really connected, to intentionally invite them to be part of Women's Bible Study. To say, hey, our youth group meets on Wednesday nights. How can we help connect your kid to this? We'd really love to see your kid, and if they need transportation, then just let me know. Or, those kinds of things. And then the third strategy here is to nurture a welcoming spirit in the congregation. So, again, this is not just a program or an activity, because it's supposed to be not just, that's our welcoming team, they're the ones who welcome, and the rest of you can just sit there stony-faced. Because that's not going to work. If it's just 3 or 4 individuals who are doing the work of welcoming. No, there has to be a welcoming spirit, a welcoming culture in the congregation. And that takes nurturing, that takes shepherding, that takes finding different ways that we talked about last night of helping people get God's heart. And it also sometimes takes an intentional effort to counter negative attitudes and stereotypes when they come up. So when there is some backlash, or when there is some whispering, or when there is, we're not sure about this family being part of this group, that there is some education, that there is some gentle, confrontation? Thank you, that was the word. Nikki?
I think it's important, too, to be able to anticipate needs and barriers ahead of time. Like one thing that that you can do is when you invite someone to, say, Wednesday night or whatever, especially if you have a welcome team that is doing this, just don't even qualify the person. Just say, here's a free meal ticket, for you and your family. Because once they actually come and get to know people, well, that's when you find out, whether or not they need help. But you've already offered it. You just,
And I paid Nikki to give us that segue into our next session, which is talking about overcoming barriers and building bridges to participation. Let me just back one thing and say that in addition to the Welcome Partner Workshop, the resources that we have provided for you online that you can access after this workshop, we're going to send out the email invitation and to our Dropbox, and then you can download the files. And it's called a Hearts and Minds resource kit. Like we talked about earlier, you need to educate minds, and you also need to change hearts. And so this is just a collection of a few resources, and you'll add to it, and we can share others as we come to it, but a few resources that you can distribute in the congregation to help them begin to get God's heart, to begin to see the opportunities for ministry. So for example, there is a 7-session devotional on God's heart for families that's included in there. There's fact sheets that can be distributed. There's a set of readings. These are very carefully selected articles that we recommend that can be shared with the congregation. And I may not endorse every sentence of every article, but on the most part, I think that these are helpful in educating and inspiring a congregation to embrace this kind of ministry. But moving on to connecting single-parent families with the life of the church. And here we want to hear from single parents by inviting those who hold quotes 13 to 17 to read those.
When I started going to Sunday school, the women invited me to their evening ministry. I couldn't go because of my work hours, but they kept inviting me. It let me know that they actually wanted me there.
Somebody have 14?
It would be nice to be able to go to Bible study. They don't have chocolate. I don't really have any names.
The reason I stayed at the church I'm in was that when I was visiting churches, there was something for single parents at this church. There was a small group for single moms, and the church was good about loving on me and my kids.
Some churchgoers have a holier-than-thou attitude. Others feel sorry for me. Inclusion is derived from empathy, not sympathy.
17, single parents need to feel that they're part of the body of Christ. That they are not just there to be fixed, but that they have something to offer, so that intense, lonely feeling is not so strong.
Our vision is that the church follows a process to help single-parent families become involved with church activities, form meaningful relationships within the congregation, and cultivate a sense of belonging. And here's our strategy: building bridges to participation and encouraging a sense of mutual belonging. So let's look at page 24, if you'd like, in your handout. When we talk about bridges to meaningful involvement, we're talking about several things. First of all, it's identifying those obstacles, those barriers, as Nikki said, that might keep people from participating, whether it is transportation or childcare or the cost of activities or the timing of activities. There are many different things that in a person's life, circumstances that they are going through that might keep them from taking meaningful part in activities. But there's, so we can't deal with all that personal stuff in a broad way. We have to get to know people and one-on-one and find out what's going on in their life. But then there are some things that we can just, as Dickie said, be proactive about and anticipate. And childcare is one of those things that for many single parents, hiring a babysitter so that they can go to a church activities is just not a realistic option. And sometimes they want to have a break from the kids. Sometimes they might want to have their kids with them. I was talking to Angela, and she was saying that, not to just assume that they're going to want or need childcare, because sometimes their time with their children is very precious. And so they're not looking for another activity that's going to take them apart from their kids. They want something that they can participate in along with their kids. So again, this is why it's important to talk to the single parents in your community to find out what those barriers might be, what their goals might be, and how together you can build those bridges to meaningful involvement. And just the point again that addressing these barriers is going to foster an overall culture of inclusiveness and involvement. Again, it's not just about the single parents. And the second point here is to identify opportunities to make current church programs more accessible or friendly to single-parent families. So there may be some things that you're already doing that just need tweaking to be adaptable to be meaningful for a single parent to participate. So you don't necessarily have to start a separate single-parent Bible study right from the beginning. You already have a women's Bible study. How do you make this women's Bible study accessible and relevant and meaningful to women who happen to be single mothers. Now, that may, like we talked about yesterday, that there are seasons in single-parent family ministry. So you may be in a season where your first thing that you're doing is not rushing out to start a separate ministry, but to take the ministries that you already have and say, how can we, like the quote said, love on the parents who are part of this ministry. So this may be adapting curriculum, and this is especially relevant for kids ministries, where some of the curriculum that there is being used may have been, like I said, written by a married person and assumes that all kids are growing up in a two-parent families, and so, you know, the examples that they're giving to kids or the directions of how to, you know, go home and hug your mom and dad, you know, or a coloring page that you hand out to kids that has a mom and a dad together. You know, just being sensitive about providing, not necessarily replacing everything, but to providing a material that is reflective of the diversity of families that are in types that are in your congregation. Anybody have some examples that you can share from?
I want to say one thing as far as when children have to go between two separate homes, and in one Sunday school, okay, we're going to memorize this Bible verse, and you get a sticker. Well, then next Sunday you're with your dad or you're with your mom. So you're not getting that sticker, and you don't get the next Bible so that you can memorize. And that has been a big hurdle.
Great point. One of the things that Linda Ranson Jacobs, who is going to be a speaker in September, talking in a workshop specifically designed for people who work with children and youth in your church, one of the things that she recommends is if you give out rewards, make them activity-based, not participation-based. So in other words, don't reward kids for having 100% attendance, because some kids, it's just not an option for them. Or provide ways of making sure that they could always make up material, that it's not time, like you said, when it's a time sequence, you have to do this by this time. That penalizes kids who are bouncing back and forth between churches. So being sensitive to those things. Any other examples? That was great.
One big thing that makes me as a single parent feel awful, and maybe it's just me, but when they send the kids home, well-intentioned, with books that they want them to bring back every week, and they have assignments that they want you to go over with your kids. You know what? I'm doing really well if I get the school forms filled out and sent back in the next day. And I mean, I actually got in an argument with the Sunday school teacher over it last week, because there comes a time when you feel like, my children love Jesus, they see what he's doing in our lives. I can't physically get this book back to you. I'm sorry. Please don't give it to me, you know, or keep it in the classroom, you know, or something. But sometimes I think that we do really well-intentioned things like that, but we don't realize that sometimes you're just trying to keep your head above water and get the school forms down.
And one of the ways to adapt a program, in this instance, the ministry, this might be to say to the mom, you know, we're going to be doing this, and I know you are doing an amazing job, and your schedule is cram-packed, so would it be okay if I took your kid out to lunch after church and we can work through this material together?
And yeah, and along those lines, SOAR, they were talking about that last night, about how their mentors that work with their after-school program, one of the things they do is get on the parent portal with the children, even though they're not the parents, and kind of do that. Well, you know, if there is a single parent that is bringing a child to class like that and actually says, I'll never get this book back to you. Well, they do have classroom volunteers like in ours that could, you know, work a little bit 5 minutes before and after on that memory verse with that kid or something. Because the bottom line is, my children are voicing that they see Jesus at work in our household. That's my main concern. Not that they bring the book back every week and have the assignment done, and I feel like a sucky parent because I haven't done it with them.
Never lose sight that it's not the paperwork that matters. Right. Somebody else have a comment on that?
We would get cards every other weekend to the teenagers saying, sorry, we missed you, where were you? And it was like the C group didn't, and everybody in the C group would sign it, were you sick, were you, and they were with their dad. It's like they never picked up that they were going back and forth.
So again, it's about building relationships and knowing a little bit about what's going on in people's
The
lives.
cards were well-meaning, but to my children, it let them
It
know that
reinforced.
their C group was out of touch with what they were experiencing in their life, you know.
It's about hearing, but not hearing. You know, you get the answer, but it's like, hello, did that register with you? What is it? Did you hear what I say? Did I say what you heard? Were they the same?
One of the stories in the readings talks about a single mother with a child who got a visit from the child's Sunday school teacher because the child had been absent from Sunday school because he was visiting his dad. And the Sunday school teacher, in the hearing of the child, said, yeah, your kid is doing a great job. It's these children of single parents that are just disrupting my class. And she said, well, you may not realize it, but you're talking with a single mom. And her son never wanted to go back to church after that. So being careful with our language. Now, that would require a very fundamental attitude shift on the part of the teacher. But there are many things that are just very simple tweaks. So how do you get at what can be done? What is it that you can just tweak and adapt, and where do you really need to do some digging down and totally revamp your approach to children or to parents? And one of the things that we'll do, the resource for this, is in the afternoon we have a bridges and barrier worksheet that you go through to identify, and a ministry assessment tool to identify, this is what we're doing. Now ask some hard questions about how is this impacting single parents, and can we adapt it in a way that is more meaningful?
Heidi, one of the things I'm getting a sense of, and I'm hoping other people are too, is that this kind of thing doesn't ever stop in the church, because you have turnover in terms of volunteers, in terms of leadership and things like this. So this cultural sensitivity and awareness and how we use language is really something that you can't set a timetable to and say, oh, we're done with that, now we move on to the next piece. This is something that has to be continually worked on and focused on.
And hopefully this is something that a single parent ministry team would be invested in. And of course there's going to be turnover in the team as well, but if you have some kind of a structure, a team structure where even though people are coming and going, there's going to be a presence, a voice for that, advocacy for single parents in the church.
Well, the culture shift, too, starts from the top. I mean, it starts from the top leadership of the church, changing the way that or just influencing the way that they address the disruptive children, the policies, whatever. Because every year, when the volunteers are recruited, they're trained. Every year, if not every semester. So, it is not an unattainable church culture shift. It just has to start from the top.
And that's why one of the things that Angela has been doing that she talked about is so important, that as she shared this morning, she went and had one-on-one conversations with each of the leaders in the church to talk about single-parent ministry and how it connected with that leader's area. So even thinking, like the worship leader, well, what does that have to do with single parents? But yet they found a connection, and the worship leader was able to affirm, yes, this is important, and let's see how we can work together. So yes, starting from the top, and that top down can start with something just as simple as a one-on-one conversation. And this is why in the beginning, when I talked about the vision for this, it had the word process, because this is not something that happens overnight. And like you said, it's not something that stops. There's no end point. It is a process. And we're continually learning and growing and trying new things and, making things right when it doesn't work. And also the constituency of single parents in your church is going to change. So whether you have younger single parents or older single parents, whether they are economically distressed or not, that constituency might change, and so their needs And the barriers are going to change as well. So here we've talked about overcoming obstacles and adapting programs. And just a word about inviting participation. In the quote that we read, we heard somebody say, they kept inviting me, and that felt good. And there's sort of a dance here between being intentional about inviting and badgering people or making them feel guilty if they just can't do it or don't want to or it's not important to them. Realizing that one of the most precious commodities in a single parent's life is their time. And so we want single parents to know here's this activity that's going on. Here's this women's Bible study. Here's this, support group. And, we welcome you. We want to know that, want you to know that if this is something that's important to you, we will do everything we can as a church to get you there or get your kids there, because we think that you would make an important addition to this. It's not just like, oh, you need this, but your presence in this is going to enhance this ministry. So communicating that, but also respecting and not judging if they say no. If their work schedule or their sleep schedule, there's a lot of single parents who have to work jobs where they don't get the day shift. They're working nights, they're working evenings, they're working Saturdays, they're tired. So they wake up, Sunday morning may be their only chance to catch up on sleep, which is vital for their physical health and their mental health, their parenting. So when you have a single parent that doesn't show up for church, that wants their kids to go so that she can sleep, but she needs that time of rest, to respect that and to find ways to communicate to that parent, this is how you are taking care of yourself. This is how we can love you, by saying you are part of our church community, even though we know right now this is your space to sleep, and that's okay. And how can we nurture your spiritual life and connect you to other things that are happening during the week so that your Sunday mornings you can sleep?
Well, not only just sleep, sometimes that's the only time they have by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any babysitters, so this is the only time they can just take a long shower, take a long bath, and just relax. Just those things in consideration when you're so judgmental towards people.
We tend, not just our children's Sunday school classes, but we as a church tend to give out reward stickers for participation. And it's assumed that the more church stuff you go to, the more spiritual and a good Christian you are. And that's something we need to step back from in order to create a welcoming culture. The question we should be asking is not, how many of these activities can we get you plugged into, but to say, what is the next meaningful step for you in participating in this community in your walk with God? And it may just be doing one thing. And that's enough. The widow's mite, she put in all she had. For a single parent who's very stretched on time and being pulled in many directions, the widow's mite might just be coming to a Wednesday evening prayer group. And that's their church for the week. And so taking people where they are, what they can and want to participate in, loving on them, breaking down barriers so that they can participate fully, but also always extending that hand to say, when you're, just wanted you to know, not feel guilty, but if in case this is something you want to do, we're starting up this group, or we think that you would have a lot to add to this activity. We're doing a service project, and just opening up the doors if that's something that you want to go to, and then accepting if they don't without judgment. Okay, and not giving up on people, because just as churches go through seasons, single parents go through seasons. So just because somebody never participated in the past, the time might be right, or just because they were active in the past, this may be a season where they need to back off. So trying to address needs in a way that affirms and empowers the contributions of families as givers in the church and rather than takers. So we've been talking about maybe we need to provide transportation, maybe we need to cover costs, offer scholarships. I think it's a tragedy if kids can't go on ski trips or whatever because their parents can't cough up the $200 that it takes. ski trip, okay, you can live without going on a ski trip. But, but there's some things that are a retreat that everybody else in the church is going to, but this mother, this child. So we want to build the bridge by providing resources, but it's important to do that, especially if this is a long-term thing, to do that in a way that doesn't foster dependency. And what I mean is dependency is if they need resources every time, that's okay. That's just part of their life. But the dependent mindset is that I have nothing to give back. So, and one option, and this was actually at a training that I can't take credit for this because I was a training and that came out of the group. One option was to invite the youth to be, for example, if they need a scholarship to go on a retreat, that they could be the helper for the youth leader and help them load up the vehicle and help them do the setup and the cleanup, and that's their job, and their payment is a scholarship to go on the retreat. Or for a single mom who, is needing assistance from the church or a scholarship to go on a ladies' Bible study retreat. Now, sometimes you just give, but if you're discerning that in this case, just giving is going to create a negative relationship with that person, then to provide an option for her to give back. So, they may not have time to come into the office during office hours, but to give them a list of shut-ins and say, these people need praying for over the week. So, I know that you feel like you want to give something back to the church, and this is something that would be really valuable if you would pray for these people. Just as simple as that. Just off the top of my head, that's an example. Anybody else have an example of ways to build bridges and provide resources in a way that affirms their contribution? Anybody else have an example of that?
I just wanted to reiterate what you said about about letting the kids do some work. Now, this is aside from earning, scholarship or anything, but it absolutely changed my 11-year-old's life. Literally, when one of the nursery workers and he was kind of, one of these acting out, kids, whatever. She grabbed him and said, hey, I think you would be really good working with 4-year-olds when you come be a teacher's assistant during church. In 2 weeks' time, it changed that child because somebody was putting value on not just him like I love you, but giving him a sense of purpose and leadership and filling this void. So really engaging the kids of single parents to engage them to help and give them responsibility, it's life-changing.
It is. And it doesn't always have to be quid pro quo, okay, you do this and then we'll pay for your trip. Because I think that sometimes that sends the wrong message too. But the goal is that people in the church do not feel like they are defined by their needs, by their deficiencies. Well, I can't go to this because I don't have X, Y, Z. And nobody always wants to feel like they're constantly taking, they constantly have their hand out. So finding a way to communicate and engage people as contributors is important.
Well, if there's activities that that you're always going to the ski trip, to the beach, whatever, if you have that on the website with an approximate cost, so not that I need a scholarship, but give me an opportunity to budget so I can meet that need myself.
Great point. Another aspect is facilitating relationships. So facilitating connections with other people in the congregation. And again, here we're not talking about starting a single-parent fellowship group or Bible study necessarily, but just relationships, friendships, people getting to know each other. One of the biggest predictors of whether somebody continues to attend a church is how many people in the congregation they consider to be their friend. So how do you take somebody who feels lonely, who feels different maybe, who feels like disengaged and maybe even looked down on and has maybe even a little bit of a chip on their shoulder coming in because maybe they've been wounded before in a church setting, so they're walking in expecting to be, rejected and judged. And being intentional about facilitating connections with other people in the congregation. Now, it's important, again, to do this in a way that doesn't, say, okay, you're a single mom, you're obviously lonely, and we need to, hook you up with this person. But Hi, honey. Sorry, I forgot to put. You know, it would be really funny if you all said hi on the count of 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Hi. I'll call you back. That was awesome. Okay, now I'm putting my phone on vibrate, on silent. Where was I? Relationships. Right. That's right, the most important one. So, facilitating connections. So one thing is you want to find ways for single parents in the congregation to find each other, to get to know each other. And First Baptist Concord has started doing luncheons for single parents after church. And, you know, there's a kids zone where the kids go and hang out, and then the parents get to just hang out. And it's not a big formal thing. It's just once a month. Hey, let's get to know each other. But also facilitating relationships with people who are not single parents. So, because that doesn't define your life. That's not the only or most important thing about you. So somebody else in the congregation who has lost a child or lost a loved one. Somebody who has a common interest, who loves gardening or loves hiking or loves sports or whatever it is, who has a common ministry passion. So finding out what is it that you really care about and connecting with other people who care about the same thing. And doing fun things together as a church, creating opportunities for people in the church, everybody to hang out. And then making sure that those opportunities are accessible for single parents. And then finally, facilitating connections with resources. So looking for ways to show kindness. So just in my own life, I can say when I first started, my husband was just starting at the church and hadn't been there for less than a year, and I had just had a baby a couple weeks ago, and my mother died. And I had to, it was just a crazy time. But I had to fly out to Arizona for the wedding. And on top of everything else, we had just moved into a new house. Just moved. So it was just so crazy. We came back from my mother's funeral with this infant and blah, blah, blah. And our yard had been landscaped. They planted flowers by our mailbox and taking care of the yard. And it was just such a beautiful gesture. And the thing was, the neighbors saw that and said, you know, any church that's going to do that to show love, I want to be part of that. And so one of our neighbors. So that's an example that shows that it's not just about single parents, that everybody goes through times in their life where they need a little extra TLC. But being intentional about finding ways to show kindness to single parents in the middle of things, but at the same time not assuming you know what a family needs. So finding ways to kind of gently figure out how do I show kindness to this family in a way that is going to be meaningful to them. And then creating ways for single parents to share their needs with the church in a way that doesn't compromise their dignity. That's important. Or anybody who's going through a financial struggle. So do people know who to ask if they're having a financial struggle? Do they know who to ask, or do they have to start with the church secretary and work their way up? You know, do we communicate to people, you know, if you're struggling, this is who you can talk to. This is how you do it. And then finally, seeking to empower rather than enable and connecting people, not assuming that you have to take care of every need within the church, but connecting with those resources. That's why we gave you that resource guide. During the ministry assessment working group, we're going to use this tool called Barriers and Bridges, like I mentioned about that. You're going to work through what are some barriers to participation in your church and how you can build bridges. This next section is tips on encouraging mutual belonging. And this is kind of a squishy. Some of these things we've been talking about have been kind of specific, you know, forms and web pages and programs, and belonging is sort of a squishy thing. I want you to close your eyes and think of a setting where you feel you truly belong, where you know you're accepted, you know you're loved. What kind of a feeling is that? Good one. Now think about sitting in your congregation. Do you have that same feeling when you're sitting at church? Probably not, because it's not as intimate as a family setting. But probably when you're sitting in a church pew, you know this is my church, this is where I go, These are my people. I'm accepted here. This is my place. This is my pew. This is where I sit. This is my role. People know me as the Sunday school teacher. People know me as so-and-so's mother, so-and-so's wife. This is important. This is part of who we are. God created us to live in community. God created us for intimate relationships. Jesus said, when he prayed right before he was killed, he prayed, may they be one. And that's how the world will know that you're my disciples. And there's this sense of separation that is a theme in many single parents' life, theme of alienation. They've been separated from a spouse or a loved one, or there's a separation with the father of their child or mother of their child. There may be a lot of anger issues between the parent and the child, so there's a separation there sometimes. So that sense of being part of something that's part of an us. So kind of hard to concept maybe to wrap around, but what I'm saying is that without that sense of mutual belonging, you can have people participating, but they're not really part of the body of Christ. So the goal is to develop a sense of moving from us versus them, single parents, the church. Now, I'm going to be guilty of that because I'm talking about single parents as if it's a them. But within the church, we want to develop a sense that we are all us. And this experience of being part of an us is mutually transformational. Because you can't be in a church that really embraces single parents and their kids, even if you're not a single parent. If you are part of a church where families are embraced, you're going to be changed. Your life is going to be transformed by that close relationship, maybe even as much as a single parent's life is. So it's not just about transforming parents, single parents. It's not just about renewing them. It's about recognizing that we are one body, and how do we need to be transformed by that relationship as well? What is God going to teach us as non-single parents through that relationship in which we all become us? Okay? So I'd like you to look at page 25. And just running through some things that help to encourage this sense of belonging and one-bodiness. And again, this is for everybody. Sharing a common vision, sharing life stories. Hearing Sheila's story this morning did something for me. It helped me know her better, and it created a bond between us. Now, if I were to sit down in one-on-one and she could hear my story, our bond would be even stronger. So creating opportunities in church for people to get past that veneer, because as we know, even intact families often have their own tragedies to share as well. Sharing significant life milestones, child dedications, graduations, weddings, funerals. So looking for ways to fill out the family of a single parent as a church representative. So, for example, in our garden ministry, we always try to attend their 6th grade promotion and sit with the family as a representative of the church. So, or when I call to do advocacy for them on a service or at the school or whatever, I'm saying I'm from their church, so that they know they've got people behind them looking out for them that are connected with them. Sharing close friendships. One of the things we're going to be talking about and offering a workshop in April is developing mentoring friendships or friendships with a purpose. So connecting people one-on-one or family to family. Sharing accountable discipleship, because when a single parent participates in helping developing another person's spiritual life, that gives permission to speak into that single parent's life. So we need to be accountable to one another, not just have it go one way. And sharing fun. Fun bonds people. Here I say that mutual belonging brings transformation and restoration. It can also bring resistance. What do I mean by that? Is that it's one thing to have a single parent Bible study, or to have one or two single parents that are attending the congregation. But when the church embraces this as part of their identity, and that may attract other single parents to come, that may make some people feel threatened. Because we want you to attend, but we don't want to say this is what our church is about. And maybe this is not the case for all of you. But let me give you an example of a church that I was consulting with. And this church was not growing. It was kind of shrinking in size. And they did, ask, what do you think is going on? Why are we not growing? And some people said it's because the kids are disruptive, because some people were bringing single parents to the church, and they're bringing their kids to the church, and they were saying, well, these kids are disruptive, and so people coming to the church are going to see these kids, and they're not going to be part of a church where there's disruptive kids. And the message was, these parents don't count as church growth. Because, wait a minute, you're saying we're bringing these single parents and their kids to church, and they're the ones that are keeping your church from growing. But they're the only ones who are coming to your church. So that's an example of how we don't count. So churches don't necessarily want to count single parents as a real part of the body of Christ. So be prepared to anticipate that. So again, we have this training coming up in April and the Hearts and Mind resources that are available to you online. All right. So moving on, talking about engaging families as kingdom assets through the church. And some of this is themes that we've been touching on over and over again. That the church values the perspective of single parents, seeks their input on single parent ministry, and invests in their gifts and talents, including those called to be leaders. The experience of being a single parent brings out leadership qualities in people. So a two-part strategy, one to seek input and the other, second, to affirm gifts. So seeking input I call learning from the experts, because who is the expert on single parenting? Single parents, that's right. And using their feedback, asking questions that are designed to give you feedback, and then implementing it on planning and improving ministry. And as Daniel pointed out, it's not just about single parent ministry, but asking single parents to give input on the church as a whole. And we're going to point you to the single parent input gathering and focus group guide. And if you want to look at page 54, just glance, this is the first page of that, and then the rest of the tool is online. But what's important is not necessarily, you're giving a suggestion for an event that you can use as a formal tool to get input. But I think even more important is just getting to know people, having conversations. So your leadership team, in addition to sitting down with the leaders of the church, also make it a goal to sit down regularly with single parents in the church. It doesn't have to be, I'm starting a mentoring friendship with you, but just, hey, I want to get to know you better, and I want to hear your thoughts on some of the things that we're doing as a church. Affirming the gifts of ministry gifts of single parents includes opening doors to meaningful service, so addressing some of the barriers we talked about. The same barriers that can come up in participating in a Bible study can also come up in participating in a mission trip or a service project. Are we designing our ministry activities with single-parent families in mind? Helping parents identify their gifts. How have your life experiences prepared you to minister to others? That scripture that was shared, that Sheila shared about, God comforts us so that we can comfort others. So providing opportunities to speak with single parents about, in your spiritual journey, how do you sense God equipping you to minister to others? Asking those questions. Providing opportunities for families to serve together, that is very important. And encouraging mutual care. Single parents matching them up so they can help meet each other's needs. Sometimes there's this mindset but we're making an assumption that single parents naturally want to minister to other single parents, so it's important not to put them in that box. On the other hand, if all of your ministries to single parents are headed by married people, that's also a problem. So you want to have a blend. And then finally, not letting ministry become a burden on single parents. Because the invitation to serve at the right time and the right way is empowering, but it can also, as Nikki was saying, it can also come across as a burden. Because you're already doing so much and you already have so many responsibilities, but you want to please the church leaders, you want to fit in, you want to feel like you're a good Christian, so that can be imposing another burden on somebody who really doesn't need another straw placed on their back. So it has to be done with sensitivity and a sense of timing and an understanding of the seasons of life, and it also has to be a culture of giving permission to people to step back and to say to people, your ministry, and this, I really think this needs to be verbalized. This needs to be said out loud to people while looking them in the face. Your ministry from God right now is to take care of yourself and your children. That's your calling from God. Be faithful to that and don't let everything else go. This is your ministry. You are raising up the generation so that, as Nikki was saying, your children can see Jesus in your household. And that's your ministry. So in affirming that, empowering that. Any questions or comments before we move on? Talk a little bit about kids. I'd like to hear from people who have quotes about kids, 18 through 20.
The hardest thing for my daughter is not having a man around. Her father wasn't the greatest father, and then he died. She needs a connection with a good Christian man.
Man 19.
Single parents need to see good parenting in action. I would love to network with married and single parents alike. A strong relationship rooted in a faith-based community would ease my fears that my son is going to grow up apart from the Lord.
20.
Children whose fathers have been abusive toward them or who have walked away and never been in their lives have a hard time hearing about God as their Father. So we need to present God as their friend or someone who walks alongside them.
Thank you. Our vision for children is that the church demonstrates God's love to children of single parents, helps them develop their potential, and lays a foundation for the next generation of healthy families. So just as we had before, the three-part strategy of welcoming, connecting, and engaging, we also do that with thinking about children specifically. So we want children to feel like a welcomed, valued part of the congregation, not just damage control, but, and that's going to take some training, and that's why in September we're providing a workshop specifically for those in the church who minister with children and youth, to train them on how to respond and engage constructively with children from single parent or struggling families. That's very, very important. Because the sad reality is that something that is done or said to a kid can turn them away from the church for their whole life. Now, that's not right. Now, God is always going to be giving them the chance to respond, but I do know children who have had an experience in the church that has soured them on, and it's so much harder to pull them back in. And the reality is that children of struggling single-parent families, I'm going to use that word struggling because not all single-parent families are struggling, but children in struggling families can't verbalize what's going on, so they're going to act it out. It's going to come out in their behavior. Church is not designed for hurting kids. We like services that are quiet and orderly and where the focus is on adults and where you have to have a long attention span. Now, that doesn't fit most kids in general. Well, it doesn't really fit me some of the time. But for a child who is going through a crisis, I had the disjunctive experience one time. We were doing we were having a ministry gathering with our kids in our garden church, and we had engaged volunteers to come bring a meal. And the volunteer who was providing the meal was asking me a question about leftovers or something, and one of the kids who was standing there came up and interrupted to tell me that their dad was getting out of jail. and that they were going to get to see their dad. And, and just kind of bouncing up and down about it. And the child spoke to me, and then the volunteer turned back to me and said, so what do I do with the leftovers? Thinking, we need to pay attention to kids. They're trying to tell us something. And that child might not have verbalized that their dad was getting out of jail that weekend. Maybe they might have just bounced up and down and not said anything. Maybe they would have hit another kid because they were so mad that their dad, who had hit them before and now is in jail, they're coming back and they're scared. Oftentimes the way that kids are feeling is what they try to make us feel. So if a child is acting out and being aggressive, oftentimes it's because they are the victims of aggression. Oftentimes if a child is whining and just being very distracting and trying to get control of the classroom, it's because they feel out of control. If they're needing attention, it's because they're not getting attention. So we need to develop the ears to listen to kids, what they're saying and what they're not saying, or what they're saying through their actions. And that takes training. That's not something that people are going to intuitive. So I really encourage you to start planting seeds now about who might come back to that September training. Connect with children of single parents, and that's addressing children's barriers to participation, because some of the things, we talked about things that might keep a single parent from coming to church or participating in church activities. For kids, it might be a different set of barriers. It may be that they don't have toiletries. And somebody in the youth group made a comment about somebody smelling, and they don't have deodorant, and now they don't want to come back. So, what is the way that we can graciously find out what is keeping kids from feeling like this is their home, and then addressing that in an affirming, empowering way. And then finally, engaging children of single parents as assets. Oh, but wait a second, I want to go back before I get to that last point. Just on this point of listening to kids. So this was a study done of children of divorce, and it asked adult children of divorce, who did you have to talk to during your parents' divorce? And so in this survey, 82% said, I didn't have anybody to talk to. Only 7% said I could talk to somebody in a church. Now you might think, well, but these are kids that may not have had a church home. So among kids who were actually attending church at the time, who reached out to them during their parents' divorce, 3/4 said nobody did. And only 1/4 of them said either a pastor or a member of the congregation reached out to them. Nobody's listening to the kids. And if we're not going to listen to them, why should they listen to us? So how does your church view the children of single parents? As problems to be prevented, that ticking time bomb, or as treasures to be protected, potential to be developed, and gifts to be enjoyed? And I tell the kids that come with me to church, I like you. You're fun. You know why I come pick you up every week? Because you're just special. You make church better because by being here. Sorry, wrong way. And how do we help kids to see their potential when everything around them is falling apart? How do we look at a child, 16-year-old parent, and say, you're going to grow up to be a Sheila? How do we look at an Andy at whatever? Andy, how old were you when your parents split up? How do you look at a troubled teenager and say, you're going to grow up to be one of the leaders in ministry in your city? How do we raise the bar of expectations for kids to not focus on their problems, but is focused on that scripture that says, I have a plan for you? All right, so we're going to close out by looking at a case study. And in your handout, and let me just say, walk you through pages 28 and 29. There's a lot of specific suggestions on how you do this stuff. So 2 whole pages of specific ideas on how to do all these things that we've been talking about in this workshop. So, page 30 has 14 case studies that you can use And again, these are not actual families, but based on real people. And it is almost 12:30, and I do apologize because I did run over, but I'd like to still do this activity. Is that okay with you for lunch? Okay. So we're going to do the case study, and then we're going to dismiss for lunch. Can we take 10 minutes to do that? Okay. 5? Okay. So we'll do 5-minute case study. We'll break at 12:35. So I want you to pick another case study, different than the one you did last night. And in this case, I want you to just do this activity on your own. Read a case study and then take notes on, in your case, and we're going to come back and talk about this, okay? So in your case, how might being embraced by a church make a difference for your family? So putting yourself in the place of this mother, think about, how would it make a difference to me and my kids if a church really loved on me? What might be some barriers that I might expect to fit in? What could a church do right now to connect with you and show you that you are valued and show love in a practical way to your family? And then how might your participation in that church be a blessing to that church? So how might you be a blessing to a church? So pick a case study. Just pull a number out of the air and go with it.